Hello again. I seem to have got into a habit of beginning some of these thoughts by referring back to the previous weeks. I'm not going to do that this week. Well, I am, but only in an indirect way. If you watched last week's video, you may have wondered why the video quality was even more questionable than usual. Sound was fine, I think, but then in my previous life I already understood the value of a decent microphone. But the picture was a bit blotchy. In one sense, the reason is that I recorded the video on my compact camera, and while I can have some control over the settings when I use it for actual photography, it seems a bit more limited when it comes to video. Or perhaps there are controls somewhere and it's me who's a bit more limited. It's a pretty decent camera in good light, but quality drops off quite quickly when the light is poor, which is probably not unconnected with the fact that it has a big zoom and a small sensor. Or to put it another way, it got dark and I probably should have put the light on. Less than a couple of weeks ago, as I record this, the clocks went back from our artificial fiddling for summertime and back to the more naturally based GMT, which, where I am now, is only 5 minutes or so out from the actual time based on the movement of the sun. And for the first time, I think, this year, I actually experienced the change from BST to GMT. I got up in the night to go to the loo a few minutes before 2 and came back to bed just after 1 o'clock. And so now the balance of daylight has shifted, so the mornings became slightly lighter and the evenings darker. British summer has ended and we're back to the meanness of Greenwich. Also, as I record this, we're into the first day of what's being called the second lockdown in England. Now, some parts of England have had very tight restrictions for some time already, but once again we have less freedom across the whole of England. The first lockdown wasn't as tight as in some other countries, and even more is open in this one. But it does include going back to closing our church buildings for corporate worship. The 4 churches where I work reopened their buildings in September. The plan was to have a few weeks of simple services and then to reintroduce services of Holy Communion this month. So I was at Tackley this last Sunday morning presiding at a communion service in church for the first time in exactly 8 months. It's felt like we're beginning to find ways of being the church as we are in the circumstances we find ourselves in, and suddenly we're closing the buildings again. This time around we know more. What began as an idea for a weekly pre-recorded service for these 4 churches quickly became what's now our circuit pre-recorded service. And we decided that the weekly circuit pre-recorded online service was going to continue, even before the current restrictions. Many of us have discovered what Zoom is. Sometimes perhaps we wish we hadn't. But Zoom and its like have enabled us to keep something of the connection, something of the gathering, something of the assembly alive. This time round I can more quickly consider what I might offer in place of being physically in the building to lead worship on Sundays. And yet I think it's fair to say that there's a feeling of deflation around the place. We thought we were doing okay. We know church hasn't been quite as we'd like it to be. For many Methodists, particularly not being able to sing together is pretty high up on the list. But we have gathered with our face coverings and our hand sanitizer, with the offering of our prayer. But quite a lot of the spring was warm and sunny, and now it feels cold and gloomy. If I say, surely the darkness shall cover me, and the light around me become night, even the darkness is not dark to you, and the night is as bright as the day, for darkness is as light to you. Some words from Psalm 139. And from a fascinating passage in Isaiah chapter 45, I form light and create darkness, and I will give you the treasures of darkness. Light and darkness is an important theme in the Bible, but its use as a metaphor doesn't always go in the direction we might think. It is metaphorical, and so we need to be careful how we talk about it, given that, for example, there are plenty of people who do not physically see as clearly as many others do. And for example, that light is good and dark is bad has too easily slipped into a perhaps unconscious assessment of people's worth based, frankly, on how light or dark they are physically, the kind of thing I've been talking about in some recent Thursday Thoughts. But sometimes it is worth pursuing those themes of light and darkness. I will give you the treasures of darkness. I will give you the treasures of darkness. Yes, the weather is getting colder, but the darkness can be comforting. Yes, it can put us in a sombre mood. It can make it feel harder to be upbeat about life. There's no denying that it does affect some people quite a lot. With our modern lifestyles of timetables which stay the same all year round, and bright artificial lights, and an expectation that life can always go on in the same kind of way, maybe we find it even harder to accept the darkness. But we can wrap up warm, and the darkness can be cosy. The darkness can be cosy. God is in the darkness as much as in the light. We may be feeling a bit down at the moment, and it's okay to admit that to ourselves if it's the case. But that doesn't take away from God being there. It's okay to lament our loss, and it is probably a kind of grief when something which matters so much to us is no longer there. But there is still hope in the darkness. There is still a future we look towards, a future we play our part in bringing in. God's promise of the treasures of darkness may be one of the most unexpected parts of the text of the Bible, but it's still there. God bless. See you soon.